Tara, you're 2 months into a 12-month lease and you're already out the door. I mean, my daughter's in the same situation
Yeah.
for very similar reasons. She was 3.5 weeks in to a 1-year lease and already had a foot out the door looking for a new place.
Isn't it
And is
insane?
only there because of the lease. That's it. And
It's sad.
Yes.
It's sad.
I'll say the first, increase your current model's efficiency, and then you go to the next thing. Don't jump to centralization and think that that's some magic stuff.
You've done it all correctly, right? You've put your wayfinding sign up and people are having a seamless experience. You're only closing at 20%. Well, understand that might be because that demographic or that product type, it just doesn't resonate as well with.
Where it was centralized, and what I saw was that staffed appropriately component. As I saw a drop in customer service because the team was so overwhelmed with everything that was going on, and there was such a breakdown in communication.
I mean, especially because those decisions are made at much higher levels than they are like the impact that happens on the day-to-day staffing, is that they automatically think, oh my God, my job's in jeopardy.
Okay, it's back. Hey, Thomas. I think people just join and then mute and then take off.
Not taken off. I just am trying to find buttons.
I'm here. I'm just chilling, yo.
I just like giving Danja shit because she doesn't mind. She takes it like a sport. You're a champ.
Kathy Scott is awesome. I love her.
Yeah, I'm really excited. It was actually kind of cool, a little women's empowerment last week to have 2 women presidents of their company join the mentor group. I thought that was pretty cool. Kind of digging that. So, hey, everyone, we are going to get started in just a minute. We have a jam-packed session, so I don't want to fill it up with a lot of fluff talk. So I'm going to do a quick introduction of who I am, just in case there's people joining on the phone who have no idea who I am. So my name is Tara Samuels. I am the founder of Multifamily Mentor Matchmaking. And if you are not part of the Multifamily Mentor Matchmaking group and you would like to join, you can message me after, or there is a link to sign up underneath my name on LinkedIn. And as of next week, October 1st, you will see me announce and launch my new job, which is working with MSV Resources as their Senior Vice President of Strategic Partnerships. So very excited for that. But without further ado, I want to introduce my panelists today. Sadly, Gina Fortune Harmon from Habitat fell ill, so she is not going to be on, but we have 3 amazing people and I'm going to let them introduce themselves. However, there are so many questions that I came up with that we are going to probably turn this into a series. And Ian, I know you're laughing at me because I think I gave you guys almost 30 questions to choose from.
You did on a Saturday, and I just looked at it and went, "Is she crazy?"
I am crazy.
Ditto, 100% ditto.
But I want to make sure I have a little flavor for everybody, something you guys can relate to. So I think this will be something that we're going to turn into a few-part series. And Gina has said she's up for that, so we'll be able to get her insights on a future call. And my husband was actually really helpful and reminded me that we should also probably have something that caters to the supplier side, because suppliers are having to make a lot of adjustments themselves as management companies are adjusting and moving towards centralization. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to come up with 30 more questions for Ian. Anyway, so let us kick it off with introductions. So Ian, if you wouldn't mind taking it away, give everybody about a minute of your background, and then I will, when we're done with introductions, I'll fire out away the first question.
Yeah, absolutely. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Ian Bingham. I'm a senior vice president with Buckingham Companies. We're an Indianapolis-based firm, owner, developer, and property manager. I've been in the industry 25 years now. Started the first 17 years of my career with Village Green out of Michigan. Held various roles there. A lot of that time was in operations. Worked my way up from the site level to a vice president over a portfolio that spanned 4 or 5 states, and then moved into a business development role. And I've worn kind of several hats since then, growing third-party property management, acquisitions, development, and of course, operations. is still at the heart of a lot of those.
Thank you. And I think I was supposed to start with Thomas. So sorry, Thomas. You can go next.
Hey, you can start wherever you want. But few of you know me. My name's Thomas. I've been on and off the calls because this past year has been a very fun year. But I have been in the operations side of multifamily for 19 years now. Some of that does include the supplier side as well. But I started as a leasing administrator here in Southern California, worked for large companies like Irvine Company, did a lease up with Prometheus Real Estate Group, and now I'm with Essex Property Trust as a portfolio sales manager. Was previously director of sales enablement at Latch. And I am also an MBA candidate this year, which is kind of why I'm back in sales management while I finish my MBA in finance at Pepperdine.
Congratulations to you.
Thank you.
Adrian, I'm going to let you introduce yourself. However, I just want to add one caveat. The timing of this call is so perfect. So Adrian, when you do your intro, if you want to touch on this, he actually came back from Blueprint, where I know Ian was, and I'm sure most of this call, the attendees were at Blueprint, but Adrian just recorded a podcast about centralization. So the timing is really good. But Adrian, go ahead and introduce yourself. I think everyone knows you, but just in case.
Everyone, Adrian Danila, 21 years in property management, all on a facility side. About a year ago, I started a new journey for myself. So I've been working as a advisor for property management companies on a facility side and also for suppliers. That's what I do, part of what I do. I also have a media company, so we produce a lot of content. It's all multifamily related. Definitely very passionate about being part of a conversation about centralization, especially centralization in maintenance. I have lots of thoughts to share when it comes to that. So,
well, this is a lot of years of experience between the three of you. So I appreciate you guys taking the time. Every conference I go to, I think you guys would agree, centralization seems to continue to be the buzzword. So it's no wonder that I not only have a lot of questions, but it's something that is going to be continued to be talked about, I think, for quite some time. So let's kick it off with the first question. And Thomas, I'm going to direct this one to you to start. So what do you think are the main perks of centralization in our multifamily world?
There's a couple of different perks from it. One of the perks that I've noticed just from the operations side is we can be a little bit more specialized. We don't have to continue to wear multiple hats and do multiple things. It allows managers, frontline people, even at the corporate level, right? As we continue to centralize, you can find more specialized roles that you can dive into and that really highlight what you're good at and give you kind of a safe space to work on maybe what you're not so good at. I really enjoy it at first. I'll be honest, because I come from the traditional ways of you have a manager, an assistant manager, a leasing consultant, maybe a bookkeeper, just depending on how large your property was, and everything was done in-house. And at first it was kind of a shock. It's like, wait a minute, what do you mean things are going away? Things are coming off. As I've grown into it now in a fully centralized role, I actually really enjoy it because I can focus on those components that I really love. And it allows me the headspace to grow the skill sets that I need to grow for my role rather than being bombarded with things that maybe aren't my strongest suit or that aren't what I'm interested in. So that's probably the main perk of centralization is that specialization and that ability to really focus on building your skills and what that means to you.
I think what you touched on, what I wrote down in quotes here is the word safe that you used.
Safe space, yeah.
Perspective in terms of having to try new things and try out maybe different roles without maybe having so much backlash and pressure. So I like the way that you phrased that. Ian, how about you?
Yeah, I think kind of wearing the owner's hat and looking at what was the allure of centralization when we were underwriting properties and looking at it from an acquisition standpoint, there's the economic impact. And what I will say, I think when we started talking about this in a realistic way, meaning there was technologies that were being built out to touch it, and people were actually implementing it. Really, COVID sped that up, right? Because it was born out of necessity that we had to start doing some of these things in a centralized manner. Because maybe geographically specific, we weren't going into the office, and so how were we going to tour remotely or collect rents remotely or maximize our facilities teams, because we did have people that were down and had to quarantine for weeks or whatever that case looked like. And so, that pushed us into the centralized model in many cases. So the economic impact, I think, is one. Kind of building off of Thomas's comment, but in a different facet. The other was taking generalists and making them specialists. And I think Adrian could probably empathize with this as well. At Buckingham, we did the facilities teams before we did the leasing teams, which was, I don't want to say counterintuitive to the industry, but certainly not the norm. And what we found in doing that was it wasn't position elimination or removal of payroll. It was eliminating a position that we couldn't fill anyway, because the pay escalation had gone up so much that we could now justify hiring someone that was truly HVAC certified and a specialist in that, or someone that was specifically, a professional in plumbing, and gear their career development and growth toward the property need, as opposed to, hiring someone that was probably pretty handy and good at several of these things, but maybe not great at all of them. And so it allowed us to really rein that in and get away from the generalist and really get more toward the specific needs of the properties that we put into these, centralized pods.
I love, I'm curious, actually, if I don't have a poll for this, but in the chat, and I'll be monitoring it, if you guys have moved to a centralized model or you are thinking about it, will you throw that information in the chat? I'll keep an eye on that. And then Ian, do you think, you mentioned that you started with facilities first. Do you think that's probably more of the trend that you're seeing and hearing from others, or do you think it's the reverse?
I think people are now starting to look at the maintenance and potting it, but I think definitely it was assistant manager, and then it was leasing, and then comes maintenance. And maintenance, candidly, I think is probably the hardest, because you are bound by a few different things. You're bound by geography. You're bound by product type, right? Maybe you have 1,000 units and they're within 5 to 7 miles of each other. You go, well, this will work. But maybe one of those properties is built in the 1980s and one of those is a brand new lease up. Well, they're going to have very different needs. And what you don't want to do is roll out, a centralized model, and the property that's brand new gets little to no time from the maintenance team because they are working on that 80s vintage product that needs so much more TLC. And then you end up providing poor customer service to your brand new product. So it has to be not just geography, but it has to be like product. And so I would say there's a lot of trial and error and hit and miss. And then you shuffle in the third party dynamic to that and convince owners that no one property will kind of get that short shrift if we do this. And that in and of itself is a trial and error and a bit of a sales process to make sure that you're making good on your word, and that, it's to the benefit, not to the detriment of any one property that you put into the centralized model.
Absolutely. I agree. Adrian, we're going to kick it off to you. I think it's important to have the 20 plus years of facilities experience that you have to kind of bring to this conversation. So what do you think are the biggest hurdles that companies run into when they are switching into a centralized model? I know, Ian, I was going to ask you the same thing and you touched on a little bit, but Adrian, take it away with your thoughts on this subject here.
I'll say concentration, which I think that, Jan already touched on. Where are your properties geographically located? The volume of work, we had to remember the volume of work does not change. So when you say that, I'm going to hire an HVAC professional to manage, to oversee 2 or 3 sites or to share them between 3 sites, you had to think about how many HVAC work hours do we typically get, how many service requests we get. Because if you have the volume that only one property could keep that property, that person busy, you end up in a situation where what are you gonna do? Are you gonna just keep them on that one property? Are you gonna split them amongst like 2 or 3 properties? Emergency HVAC is an emergency. When you include travel time, it becomes tricky, right? Because instead, like having a person like spending 8 hours working, you gotta introduce some travel time too. So for larger assets, multifamily larger assets, I think this is the most challenging thing, how to make it work. For smaller assets, it totally makes sense. And I'm actually, surprised if those managers that had like the 50 unit asset, the 70, the 100 unit asset did not do that already. Like, why is it not done? And it's a conversation now. So I think it totally makes sense on a smaller assets, right? That don't require like full-time personnel. Larger assets, a lot more difficult for the reasons that I mentioned. And I think that probably a first step would be, how do we work on basically fine-tuning the existing process, and then next step is centralization. In my mind, that's the way I see it. Like, make sure that right here, like, we're focusing on doing the best we can with the current, like, I'll say the legacy model, I'll call it, and then we go the next step, centralization, and we improve. Because in my mind, this is a business that's already being scaled, right? By the fact that you have 200 apartment homes or 500 or 1,000 in one place. And by centralizing it, we try to basically super scale that, which again, like, I don't say it's an impossibility, but there's a lot of moving parts, and I don't see it as an easy process. So those are, in my mind, the challenges that I'm seeing.
Those are really good thoughts. I'm looking at the chat, and it's funny, the trend I'm seeing is a lot of people are thinking about it. Kendra touched on the fact that like the research that you have to do to find out if it's a good fit for your management company, your size, just how things are right now. So just interesting. And I saw Danja, they actually have centralized maintenance right now. So just kind of keeping an eye on that. Ian, I'll toss it back to you on this question to see if you have any more thoughts.
Sure. And we'll talk broadly about all the different site level positions. I think one of the hurdles that's been self-imposed is, because this has been such a topic of conversation, something that we're all not only keenly aware of, but in many cases excited to do and roll out. You get into budget season and you go, okay, we're doing the centralized thing and it's going well. And then sometimes you create your own hurdle, because performance is probably the largest hurdle. And maybe that's because you get inundated with move-outs at a property for whatever the reason might be, or work orders start to spike at a property, and it goes back to my earlier comment. Is everything else in the pod suffering? Do you consider pulling that property out of the pod? And if so, what are the ramifications? Because you've already budgeted to call it a different payroll schedule. And I think that could be some of the biggest hurdles is when we budget under this new guise of centralization, and then the property needs to maybe go back to a more traditional model, or just call it whatever you want, upstaff for a period of time to get them through performance woes. It can create a lot of disruption for sure.
Yeah, really, really good points. Thomas, I'm going to kick it back to you. So with teams handling tasks from afar, I've got such a long question here. Try to memorize these, and I can't remember 30 of them. But anyway, so what skills and qualifications should we be on the lookout for in candidates to make sure that they can juggle centralized systems and on-site needs?
I love this question because I've actually been hiring myself lately, and this is my first foray into hiring from a call center model, because my team is here in an extension of our corporate office, and we do fully remote self-guided touring. So when I've been hiring, I've been looking for customer service, really. That's first and foremost. And I've been looking at do their positions lend them to handle multiple things all at once? Because in a centralized model, you have to get really good at juggling. And you have to be able to remain calm under that. You have to be able to keep your eye on the prize, keep yourself motivated. but also prioritize. You're not physically on site in the model that we have. So how do you sell when you're not seeing the product? You can't touch it and feel it. What are we missing? So a lot of that is I look for how resourceful a candidate can be. And there's different behavioral based questions that you can ask to do that during the interview process. And just also having frank conversations with them, because you can tell by their body language if they're going to be able to juggle it. One of my newest hires actually came from logistics. So we have to stop thinking about the traditional methods of hiring where it's how much sales experience, sales. It's customer service. There's logistics can play into that. Hospitality plays into that. How do you do things with low touch, but still make it feel like it's high touch?
Can you share, it's interesting how you talked about the body language, like essentially that you could tell in these interviews. Can you give me like a tell sign that maybe you've seen where you're like,
You start to hear one of two things. You start to hear people get overly excited. And it's like, wait, I don't have to talk to people. No, you're going to be on the phone. You have to talk to people. So that overexcitement of when it's like, I'm not people facing, you are, it just looks different. Or the, oh my God, what am I going to do? You mean I have to do that? Because I have leasing agents that are handling 30, 40 tours a week. And that's just, it's normal in this environment where tours are no longer an hour because you're not, doing the Gilligan's Island, walking through all the amenities, getting lost on the way to the vacant apartment. Existing candidates also that come from within the industry, because we have an app team. So basically, once the person applies, my team goes hands off and it goes to an application consultant. So when I hear somebody get overly excited, it's like, wait, you mean I just have to lease? That's all I have to do? That's a little bit of an orange flag. I wouldn't quite call it red, because you do have those high performers who are like, yes, I want to do just that. And they can focus on the quality, versus other people who are like, oh my God, I'm just going to close everything regardless. And it doesn't matter what kind of quality it is. It's just going to close and I don't care about my cancels. So there are some other supporting questions in an interview process that you would ask to filter those out. But those are kind of some of the things I would look for. Mostly though, I would really stand on customer service and roles where you can see that they've either created efficiencies or optimized things. One thing I did want to touch back on the previous question though is when it comes to centralization, it doesn't mean the same thing for everybody. And sometimes you have to go through pain points and go through challenges and let your data have a longer time. Because one of the classes I'm in this term for my MBA is data-based decision making. And so you can't be, when you're thinking centralization, you cannot be afraid to go through struggles. You're going to have immediate successes, but you are going to have some pain points too. Give yourself time, write your budgets accordingly, and kind of really plan for those struggles is what I would say, because it may not work up front, but it might work longer term once you've ironed out some of those details that you wouldn't quite figure out without the gift of time.
Those are really great points. Thank you for circling back on that and for adding a little bit of color to your interview process. So Adrian, I'm going to kick this over to you. This is really kind of a two-part question, but tapping into your maintenance viewpoint. Centralizing maintenance requests help assign tasks and resources faster, cutting down the time between when an issue is reported and when it's fixed. So how has centralizing maintenance operations improved response times and efficiency? I know you're obviously not on site anymore, but you can take your collective experience, I'm sure, and answer that. And then if there's any tools or maybe tips or tricks that you can share in that same regard, that would be great.
Well, I like to start here with a little bit of automating tasks. So the classical model, I guess, for the legacy model is that the service manager manages at the site their printing service requests where, they use an app on a phone to delegate those tasks to their team members. Now, there's technology that actually help you create profiles for each technician at the site level. And actually, based on their strengths, the system assigns service requests to them. So they don't have to be done manually by a service manager or by any person. To say that, And then also you could set up minimum numbers of requests that they should have at any given time. So in other words, there's a lot of times when you would go to a property and you'll see, the maintenance team at a maintenance shop waiting for, some direction because, maybe the service manager is not available to assign tasks to them. Well, these systems are actually eliminated that issue because at any given time, if you set a minimum number of service requests that they should have in their queue, when that minimum is being met, the next service request comes automatically to the person that has the one below that minimum. So in other words, if you just say at any given time, you should have 3 requests in your queue. And, when you're down to 2, then the system automatically assigns you another service request. So that helps, right? In that respect, I think technology is a tremendous tool. There's going to be used more and more. When it comes to assigning them from a central location, I don't have enough experience, enough data to speak on that. In my mind, it's just I don't think that we've been doing this long enough, at least to my knowledge, to have an educated opinion on how is that working or maybe not working so well. But technology is definitely a thing that should be considered. And it could be very helpful, very impactful.
Great insights there. Ian, how about you on the same 2-part question?
Yeah, no, I think, Adrian makes several of the valid points that I would make. There's probably 3 come to mind, fantastic resources that plug into pretty much every major property management software solution that will auto-assign those work orders based on the discipline or the skill set of the individual technician. At least 2 of them, to my knowledge, will also geolocate the individual. So you can make sure that not only is it the plumbing work orders are going to Adrian and the HVAC work orders are going to me, but if I'm at a property and my queue is low, right, I don't have enough to do, it's going to say, oh, well, Ian's at property A. Let's send him this generalist work order that we know is within his purview because he's already there, cutting down on that back and forth time and that drive time. And that's all technology driven. And to Adrian's point, then you don't have to have, a service manager playing traffic control. It's all being done by the app. And there's a trial and error. I think one of the ways to get in front of that is you really do need to make sure that what your technician says is their strong suit or their skill set is truly their strong suit and their skill set. So maybe in that first 30 to 60 days of onboarding, do a bit of shadowing, do a bit of follow through on those work orders. And I'm not saying just calling and saying, was your faucet fixed correctly, but, going in and physically looking and making sure that it's meeting a standard that you as the service manager agree with to make sure that it's auto directing to that individual. But I also think, as I speak through that, the other thing that it's helped with is that automated follow up and follow through. I see some of the faces on here and some of the folks that represent products that I'm talking about that would agree that, AI has come a long way. I still think that there's a long way to go, but, the follow through and the follow up has become automated to a point that I trust its professionalism. In the past, it's just kind of a generic looking survey. And I go, I really like a higher touch point, right? I really would like someone making sure that it was done to their satisfaction, not just give us, a 5-star rating and can we post this to our socials, but the higher touch point. And we're getting to the point with AI and how that attaches to our property management software solutions that we can really gauge the callback. And so that becomes one of those KPIs that when you centralize, or even when you're not, gauging the success of the technician or the overall system to say, we do have the right person doing the right service requests because their callback is down to 10% or whatever it was. And if you've owned that property or managed that property for a discernible period of time, you can look at same store results and see, am I doing better or worse on my, return work orders for the same issues. And so, without technology, could we do that? Sure. Would it be a laborious manual process? Absolutely. So that has sped it up to, kind of a 2-click process instead of someone spending days trying to determine that.
I like that you talked about the follow-up in terms of having that higher level person make sure that the work order is completed to a certain level of standard. That actually is a really good point. And I'm curious about the callback. Is there a specific defined time? It's been 15 plus years since I've been on site. So I'm curious, like, obviously the goal for every move-in is that when the resident completes that move-in report, that there's hopefully, knock on wood, nothing on there other than like some wear and tear you already know about. So they complete that, and then does the clock go to like 30 days when you consider it not being qualified as like a callback? Like, what is that time frame? I don't even know if I'm articulating my question correctly.
I'm not quite sure either, but I'll answer, I guess, two ways and what I think you're asking. So, on the move-in, anything identified in there is going to be treated like any other work order, right? And so you strive for 24 hours. Sometimes you're up to 48, depending on the severity and the need. Hopefully, it's not an emergency, or it's your 1 hour. But that's kind of the same of any follow up and follow through. So we're going to get that service request. The clock starts running, and then again with these systems, you can focus and kind of elevate repetitive work orders to, I wouldn't say an emergency status, but you can certainly kind of push those to the front of the line because you have a customer service concern. I've seen it too, and I'm doing this without trying to advocate for anyone's product, but I've seen this as well, where that return triggers a physical response, meaning it takes it out of the AI hand, and then the service manager or property manager is going to pick up the phone and say, "Boy, we missed the mark on this one, and I'm so sorry. We're sending someone over right now to address that," so that they're not kind of caught in the AI loop. That you can put some triggers in there to make sure that someone's picking up the phone and addressing it.
Thank you for elaborating on that. I want to go off script for a second. I'm looking at the chat. Allie, first I want to just say thank you for having that background, because I do want to say just out loud that it is National Property Managers Day. So very, very cool that we're having this conversation. Thank you for reminding me that today is that day. But she brings up some really good thoughts and questions, and I just want you guys to just look at the chat. We are going to have some Q&A, hopefully for a few minutes at the tail end. But Allie, I like how you were talking about how this is affecting kind of the leasing agent commissions, their closing ratios, et cetera. So when you guys get a chance, take a look at some of the notes and comments from Allie in the chat. And Thomas, thanks for engaging with your experience there. So let us pivot. Did everybody get the visual of Ross with the couch when I said the word pivot? Oh, okay.
Pivot.
So, pivot. So Thomas, let's go over to you. Can you give us some examples where centralization actually has worked out well and what the outcomes were?
Yeah, one of the things, touching back on our favorite subject of the call, maintenance. And when I was at Prometheus Real Estate Group, we actually centralized the final account statement process, which is something that a lot of companies have said cannot be done. We did it, and it worked well. So what we would do is when a resident would give notice, we would take the notice on site, enter it, upload it, and then create a kind of just a bare bones move out packet. So that way we had everything that my service manager needed, we needed. Our home-based coordinator, because that's what they call it. Prometheus has a very specific lingo. So our centralized team was called home base, and our home-based coordinators would schedule the move-out inspection, do everything after the notice that we would typically have handled on site. What worked well is those questions weren't coming into the office where my team had to then juggle multiple hats, wait for a service manager, delayed response time. It was handled by somebody that's what they focused on. And it allowed me to leverage my service manager and our service request system and say, hey, this is what's going on. These are the times. Are you aware of it? Great. Does that work? Let me know so I can relay whatever we need to do. Really streamline communication and really optimize that process where we wouldn't have got it because all these other things that happen on site in a day. So we noticed our pre-move out inspections jump way up, which made the accuracy of our move out charges go way up. It allowed our team to get in and take pictures earlier. And so then at move out, what our service manager would do is they had more authority is not the right word. I think they had more involvement and more ownership over those recovery line items and budgets. So that way, when they're billing, it's not just, oh, yeah, we just did this. They were actually able to track more because they saw how those expenses really hit their budgets. And then they were like, oh, I'm involved in the process. It's not just coming to an invoice and somebody saying, oh, they had a hard time. It was actually like a pre-final account statement form that they would say, painted X amount of walls, did it in-house or not? Here's the charge, like here's the charge. Or, hey, carpet was old anyways. We only did touch-up paint. We painted less than 3 walls. Don't charge them for a full paint. They were more involved in the process. And all I had to do was either give recommendations and agree and sign off on that form, scan it and upload it. We had, I think we had a week. Yeah, we had 5 days post move out to do it. And it was super easy. And the accountability that we had on our audits, it really transformed. And my audits became less about, oh, you missed this small little detail, and a bunch of details that added up to how's your collaboration, how's your teamwork. Here in my current role, what's working out really well is the fact that my team is with another team. So we have between North, South, and Central Orange County, we have close to 30 people, 30 leasing consultants in one office where they can all talk and hear each other. And the amount of synergy and the amount of growth and the skill sharpening that I've seen in such a short time, unparalleled. And you wouldn't get that in a disparate environment. Even baby centralization is what I'm going to call it, where you have pods and people are still on site and they're in their little leasing centers. You get a touch of it, but you don't really get the true feel of it. And I get it, right? The remote environment doesn't work for every company. Call center type environment doesn't work for every company, and that may not be the experience they want to have or the goal they want. But in this type of model, you have more resources available. The other thing that I've seen with centralization where it worked out well is managers got to focus more specifically on their coaching skills, and they got to have deeper, more meaningful skill building sessions. And I'm saying that very specifically because coaching is not punitive. It is really just to focus on what can you do differently, what's a skill gap, and how can I help you get there. And the fact that we've been able to hone more in on that coaching piece, augmenting one-on-ones, I've noticed a huge difference in employee morale in those types of settings. People feel like they're closer to their manager. They feel more supported, and they feel like their opinion matters more.
I didn't even think about the coaching aspect. That's a really good point. And I do like when you were talking about involvement, I do see how having that involvement and a little bit more of that ownership gives that person almost like that CEO mentality where they're more conscious and sensitive and maybe pay more attention to the outcome and the process because they have that involvement, which long-term obviously benefits everybody. So love that. Ian, I'm going to toss it back to you on this.
So, and I'm going to avoid kind of the cliches of what worked out well. I think, the successes really come down to some of the KPIs that you can take away. And what we found is increased accountability. So not to completely copy, because less of the coaching and counseling, but more of a who's great at what has come out of both the office side and the facility side of centralization. It's also been eye-opening from an asset manager level because we've layered on some complex technologies that help us literally pinpoint plumbing work orders, or to Adrian's point, the HVAC work orders, and you go, where do we have real discernible issues? Because, from the asset manager level, you're looking at the monthly statement and you're looking at the property manager and the regional's variance report. But how often are, those folks actually getting out and physically on the asset to understand where and budget for some of the things that might be coming up the property. And as we've rolled out the centralized model, it's allowed us from a fiscal standpoint to upgrade the tech. And that tech has allowed us to then pinpoint, hey, show me all the leaks in the property. Oh, wow, the northeast elevation of that long building has a lot of leaks. We've got a roofing or a tuck pointing issue that we may not have pieced together without that upgraded technology. So, I think centralization is you need, my opinion, some great technology to make it more successful. It's helping bring to light other issues that were outside of the centralization piece per se.
Do you have, I love that, and I love the increased accountability. Just kind of curious really quick on the technology upgrade, what's like a general rule of thumb if you make an investment, and let's just say, each technology agreement contract length is different, but let's just say it's 12 months. How often is your team, or is there a committee of team members evaluating that tech? Like, because let's say you sign a 5-year agreement or a 3-year agreement. Sometimes I think there isn't enough evaluation to make sure the impact of the usage is there, and that the buy-in and just all of that. Like, I'm just curious from Buckingham's standpoint, what's like your general rule of thumb in evaluating those tech upgrades?
Yeah, I will say from Buckingham, and as well as just my general rule of thumb throughout my career, you said 3 or 5 year, and I cringed. Never. Probably 1 year, and it's going to have a 30-day out. And in an industry that is predicated a lot on third party, that's usually required in the property management agreement that you have that sort of exit. So,
yeah,
that's kind of the normal cadence on that. On the evaluation, we've got some internal team members. That's all they do is look at the technologies. Now, I will say some of that's on an annual basis. Some of the stuff that's called the hotter spinning plates is quarterly. I've always believed, and more as our industry gets more and more complex, kind of every 6 months for a lot of this stuff, you need to evaluate it because it's changing every 6 months. And by the way, if someone goes, well, we haven't really done much in the last 6 months, that might give you pause on the consumer side to go, they're not innovating in a period when everyone else is really innovating. That's scary. So we're doing that on a very regular cadence. The other, kind of to elaborate on one of your questions, we roll things out in bite sizes before we roll it out company wide. So we would never roll anything out that didn't kind of run a beta on a small group. We try to give call it the supplier the benefit of the doubt. So we're not going to put it on our most challenging property in our hardest to rent submarket. We're going to find stable assets with tenured property managers that can handle it to make sure that we're giving everything a fair shake. But we're pretty pragmatic. We definitely are going to date for a long time before we're going to sign an agreement that obligates us to, portfolio-wide rollout or longer periods of time.
Those are really good tips. I love that I got a reaction out of you with the 3 and 5 years.
Never.
That's hilarious. Adrian, I want to go off script with you for a second, just based on what I'm seeing in the chat to get your perspective, because I'm noticing that Dave said that for his sites, the turn should be done well enough that there shouldn't be any work orders for a year. What's your opinion on that? How do you feel just from your previous experience? What is that year? Because at first I was like, whoa, that's kind of harsh, but how do you feel? Is that fair, Adrian?
I think it's a high bar, very high bar. I just think, especially when you're thinking about older assets, and also think about program obsolescence. I worked, and I'm also, a small owner, I own some duplexes, and 10 months in, I had failure on a HVAC system, like the compressor died. I had to replace it in 10 months on a brand new property. So it's kind of tough, right? And when you're going into wear and tear and older, there's so many things that you can't really control. Like people will use, but sometimes they might abuse. So a year, it's a lot. Not to say that it's not a great goal to have, but I don't see it. On the other hand, I'm thinking, is that do we get a year? Maybe because, we have residents that don't report, because, we have some of those too, right? That they actually don't report. They don't like to call work orders in. Well, that's what we should have it covered by preventative maintenance. But to go back to your question, I've done a month, 30 days from the move-in. That was the goal. I think to me, that's a very, good goal. Like if you're making your 30-day mark with no callbacks, that's an amazing make ready that you did. That's an amazing punch. Absolutely. Whatever's beyond that, great, right? I'll take it. But I just think that for standards, for KPIs, for the maintenance teams, if you say you have 30 days, an entire month with no callbacks, no maintenance calls, that's a fantastic move. That's a fantastic make ready quality to me.
And I'm looking at Corey's comment. We measure and focus on service requests within 7 days of move-in. Anything to elaborate on that kind of statement in terms of that time frame? Do you feel like that seems to be on trend with what you've seen?
Well, most companies that I've seen really don't that I work for, I should say, right? Don't really have policies of this nature. But I work for a few that had policies, right? And again, the ones that I worked for, they were like 30 days, 7 days. I think that's good, right? Going back to what I just said, that most of the companies I work for did not have an expectation.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a great start.
I'm going to kick it back. We kind of touched on tech a little bit already, so I want to kind of jump forward for a second. And sticking with you, Adrian, as maintenance and leasing roles get more tech focused, how can we weave ongoing training into our hiring process to keep candidates up to speed with new tech?
I think AI is going to play a significant role, and it probably already does. It's not common knowledge yet. I'm going to explain why. I think that while we're talking right now, there's someone out there creating training bodies, AI training bodies. Basically, AI that's going to pair with certain positions at the site level, not just site level, but let's just start with the site level. So a leasing agent, a maintenance technician will have a training curriculum, and someone is building AI profiles to be the resource for that particular technician, for that particular leasing agent, to actually provide them training and provide them assistance when they're running into a situation that they don't know the answer to. And that's going to probably eliminate a lot of clutter that we see in a tech stack currently. There's so many companies, some of them that I actually work for, that the tech stack is overwhelming, especially for entry-level employees. There was a conversation last year at UpTech where an executive was mentioning our leasing agents got to be proficient in like 57 pieces of software. And then there was another executive over there on a panel that replied, well, that's great. Our number is 63. So we're just kind of getting to a point to where in some cases we're punishing our people with technology. But I think there's hope really. And I think that AI is going to play a significant role in just kind of helping us without the unnecessary, technology.
Yeah, I think you bring up a great point about AI. And I think as we continue to make this topic, hopefully a series with a couple other future calls, I think we'll dig into AI a little bit more. I want to talk about the resident experience, but I want to share, Ian, I'm going to toss this to you, but before I get your take on this question, I wanted to share just like a super quick story where many of you know that my husband and I just downsized, and we were looking for some specific things in a townhome community. It turns out it's with a property management company that we know. And we are unfortunately, and I won't name who they are, going through some pretty negative hurdles with regards to our air conditioning and how their kind of company policy is they try to do everything that they can in-house first, and then they've got people from other communities, maybe even an hour away, who are on call and don't really have the know-how, don't know the community, don't know that particular type of equipment. And so it's snowballing into a really negative resident experience for us. Because I feel like some companies might be doing the same type of thing where it's like, they don't want to pay an outsource if they can't fix the problem until it reaches a certain point. But what we're feeling is that at what point are you willing to sacrifice possibly losing us as residents for a future renewal? And so this question is definitely hitting home for me because we're going through something. And by the way, we've been here over 2 months and the damn thing is still not fixed. And as you guys know, it's been in the 90s in Atlanta, so it's fantastic. But so Ian, just kind of curious for you, like, what are you seeing in this? I think we're going to dive more into this on a future call too, about not only resident experience, but also the experience for team members on centralization. But I'll toss it to you.
Yeah, so and we'll start, I guess, on the facility side of it, although my brain was gravitating the other way. But yeah, so when we started this conversation, I said, you have to have the forethought and the ability to pull a property out of a pod or out of centralization if it has greater needs. Conversely, you need to be able to staff appropriately. If you have 1,000 units and you go in and you say, okay, we could do that with X number of technicians, this is all still fairly new, right? And because it's still fairly new, you may get your math wrong. You may have to add another technician. It may be that because your property is an hour outside of where the skilled technician is, you're going to have to budget for either more payroll or more outside contracting at those properties. And so, I would say it's a math problem. But when you let it devolve into a customer service problem, I mean, you and Rob are probably looking at not renewing. You're 2 months into a 12-month lease, I would assume, and you're already like, screw this place. So they have allowed what probably was less than $1,000 worth of HVAC fix affect the outcome of your lease. Yep. Penny wise, pound foolish. You have to know that you're not going to have all the answers going into centralization. How does centralization overall affect the resident experience? I think on the service side should be great. You need to be able to pivot, to use your word. On the leasing side, and the, call it the collection and renewal side, collections and renewals have turned into more of tactical items, very different tactical items, by the way. So you do more often than not in centralization have the person that's smiling, saying, is everything great? We hope you renew. Also being the one saying, why are you delinquent? Let's get you caught up. And those are two very different conversations, right? So, Thomas made the point earlier about qualifications and going through that interview process correctly. You're going to have someone that has to wear two very different hats in that centralized, call it assistant manager role, making sure that you have someone with the personality and the skill set that can shift. I think makes all the difference. And then the tour process itself, right? We've added technology and we've added centralization, and everyone I've talked to, ourselves included, you're not centralizing without adding self-guided tours. And I think that's something that, as we come toward the end of this call, we talk about self-guided tours and how that affects the centralized model. I think it's great. I go back to my own comment about COVID, where we all had to figure out how to do it. Some of us did it very elementary. Some of us got very sophisticated and spent the money in the wayfinding and what we needed to do to make that just an awesome experience. I'll tell you, with mixed reviews, and it's product specific, it's demographic specific on whether it works. If you've got an urban high rise that's catering to the eds and meds, this works great, right? Because their work schedule is not a 9 to 5. And we're having trouble staffing on Saturdays and Sundays. One of the groups, I saw someone from there on here. Their whole tagline is, we don't want to work weekends, right? It is hard to find leasing professionals that want to work on a Saturday and Sunday. Now, if they're really money motivated, I would argue, make hay while the sun's shining, but that's a different conversation. But, does self-guided touring work just as well in the garden community in suburban Indianapolis as it does in Manhattan? No. And so I would also say, don't approach things with a one size fits all, have realistic expectations. You may roll out self-guided touring at both those assets and those different product types, but, start to evolve your policies around what you know to be true. Don't have this closing expectation of, 40% of self-guided tours are going to close to leases if you've done it all correctly, right? You've put your wayfinding sign up and people are having a seamless experience and you're only closing at 20%. Well, understand that might be because that demographic or that product type, it just doesn't resonate as well with. There is not a one size fits all approach, and be flexible because your residents are going to have different needs and desires.
I agree. And to chime in here, I've lived as a resident before I came back from the vendor side into the management side, where it was centralized. And what I saw was that staffed appropriately component. As I saw a drop in customer service because the team was so overwhelmed with everything that was going on, and there was such a breakdown in communication. Air conditioners that must be in the water. I think, gosh, I know what I do know. And my secondary line was iced over, and it was literally raining inside of my bathroom one night. And the maintenance technician came, and I knew exactly what to do, how to bypass through the night to get to the morning. Resident services will call you. They never called, and then 3 days later, it was just a dear resident email. So while technology has played a critical role in helping alleviate some of that, we also have to have the correct systems in place to remind our teams that even though we're centralized, we're still humans. And Ian, I love the point that you were just making about self-guided tours. It is not a one size fits all. On the other hand, from a sales management standpoint, do we have the correct sales process put in place? Is there even a process? And does it make sense? Because I love that you're saying, maybe it makes sense to pull out of centralization. One of the things that you need to evaluate when you're doing that is, do we have the correct systems in place, not just from a technology standpoint, but from an actual human standpoint? Does our team know how to sell? Are we giving a consistent experience in how we're selling and how we're talking to people? That component is huge to making centralization work. And it's not standardization where everybody does the same thing all the time. It's, here's our roadmap, but you have all these different paths you can go down to get to the same place. You choose. It's that associate empowerment that really makes centralization work, and being open to receiving that feedback. Centralization is kind of the new buzzword, and it, like I said, it means many different things, but 9 times out of 10, the feedback that I've seen work and implement and make actual changes, what comes from the teams that are actually doing it. I would say that would be my advice to people who are thinking, hey, I'm in a leadership position, do I do this with my team? Is listen to what their needs are and listen to what they're telling you and investigate it and do your due diligence, because it might be unfounded. I would probably say 75% of the time it is. It's a want, not a need. But there is a grain of truth there as well. They have a lot of the answers. They may not know the way to get there, but a lot of the end state goals I've realized have come from somebody saying, I want this. And it's, well, it might look a little different, but we end up moving or shifting towards that stated want.
I love it because we were going to get into final thoughts, and Ian, I think you naturally went into kind of your summary, and Thomas, you just did too. So before we close out, I want to give Adrian a chance to kind of give any final thoughts that you have just on anything that we've talked about today.
Yeah, I'm very interested to see how the concept of centralization is going to work for facilities. I think that we're really early in a game. I don't think that there's enough data out there and enough cases, or at least not to my knowledge, right, to say if this is going to work or not. I think centralization is not the same thing for everyone. I think that the smaller portfolios on the maintenance side have a better chance to implement centralization. It makes way more sense than, the larger assets. There's also for larger assets, I think, an alternative, which is not a either or, like we either centralize or don't centralize. You could look at portfolios and say, we're experiencing staff shortages in this market at this 5 properties of like, we average 5 techs. Any given time, we have 5 technician positions. Take those 5 openings, do not like close them, but also hire 2 or 3 techs to actually fill in and run them at a centralized level to fill in to be kind of like the relief team. I've done that and I've seen that bearing some amazing results actually. So I think that that's also a possibility, but again, time will tell.
Yeah, and I think that the theme is one size does not fit all, right? I mean, that's essentially what
100%.
we're
100%.
hearing.
It's just so much to it. Like almost every single case has its own specifics, and it does.
Yeah.
And you had to like talk it through and manage and like work out the kinks in a system and everything. I just think that we have a long way to go when it comes to finding the answers here.
I agree. I can stay on for a couple extra minutes. My panelists, if you need to jump, feel free. I am going to be sending out a survey to everybody to kind of get a little bit more insights on what you'd like to see as we morph this into more conversation specific questions. I noticed Mike Whaling talked about in the chat, the marketing side of things. Great point. So I would like to collect feedback. But if anyone wants to come off mute, if you have anything, if the panelists have to leave, I can collect any questions. But I would like to thank you all for your time. I appreciate it. And if no one has anything, sounds like everyone's jumping.
Oh, I'm staying. I'm here.
Oh, you are. Hey, girl.
Hey.
Great call. Good stuff.
Thank you. I
Yeah,
love
the
all
biggest
chat feedback too.
One of the biggest things with centralized, especially when it comes to leasing, one of the biggest things if you're using a centralized leasing office and using any AI, one of the biggest things is the calendar. There's a lot of people out there, there's a lot of companies out there that don't have a merged or centralized calendar. So you can, and you've got to operate on multiple calendars. So the calendar is a big sticking point, I guess is what I want to say. Now, we do have one, however, and it doesn't integrate with like a lot of the PMSs. So they have to utilize what calendar that we have. So if they're accustomed to using a Yardi calendar and an Entrata calendar, and they still want to use those calendars, Entrata and Yardi haven't built out a centralized calendar yet.
That's a really good point. It's something that I didn't even think of. So here's the thing, you guys, when I decided to do this topic and I started to come up with questions, and Adrian, you get to see how many questions I started with, I realized as we've had our first call, how many, like we haven't even really scratched the surface, like how much centralization impacts so many things operations wise. Paul, do you have, like, not to put you on the spot, but with your role, is there anything that you want to add to this conversation? Because you've got the maintenance, you've got the training, you've got the education, all that.
I was typing into the chat, and because it's probably a bigger question than what would want to be, at least in my mind it is.
Yeah.
The question I've got is, a lot of the panelists talked about using technology, which I agree. Great. And Adrian, thank you for bringing up the fact that it's a stack. You just about have to have, and especially Michelle, to your point, you've got to have that integration to where every piece of that has to talk with every other piece. But my question is, with all of that background in place, what would the cultural steps need to be to change from a traditional human centric model to a technology centric model, which is a massive culture shift? Just Tara, I was thinking through your air conditioning problem, which, by the way, if I can do anything, let me know. neighbor.
Yeah, right.
The just on your air conditioning problem alone, you've got the initial work order that you called in.
Mhm.
Chances are that went to a piece of technology. That piece of technology in a centralized model would have dispatched somebody. And Ian may have solved this in his project, which I think would be interesting. But just thinking through the steps, the work order then goes to a piece of technology which writes the service request. The service request goes to the technician. The technician shows up. The technician either does or doesn't attempt a repair, and whatever happens, the repair doesn't work, which means you have to call back again to let them know to a piece of technology. Meanwhile, the office has gotten a split off of that technology to try and follow you up with a resident satisfaction survey. Meanwhile, you're calling in with dissatisfaction, so you don't even want to answer the first one. So now you've got two technology strings going. Add that to the third wrinkle that somewhere along the line, a dollar trigger or a person trigger has happened to where now there's an internal messaging that goes to a regional or a higher level maintenance or your operational leasing manager, property manager, regional manager there, that you said in your case, they have to wait for an hour, hour and a half for somebody to come take a look at it. Where meanwhile, all of this could have just been solved. And I'm sure there's other stuff I don't know. All of this could have just been solved with the maintenance technician who was empowered enough to say, I don't know how to fix this. Here's a way to get you through short term until I can call a vendor partner to come deal with this. And then all the liability of that technology burden goes to the vendor. So I might be oversimplifying it. And it comes down to, how does a management company make the cultural shift to go from a person empowerment model to a technology solution model? And where are the stage gates to put into place so that at each one of those levels, if we're using technology, when does it, like I think it was Ian or Thomas that said it gets spit out to a human. At what point does that stage gate say, this is too complex and there are too many people involved? Where, Tara, I think Ian hit it on the head of, you're 2 months into a 12-month lease and you're already out the door. I mean, my daughter's in the same situation for very similar reasons. In her case, she was 3.5 weeks in to a 1-year lease and already had a foot out the door looking for a new place.
Isn't it insane?
Is only there because of the lease. That's it. And it's
sad.
Yes.
It's sad. It really is sad. And listen, and we don't deserve special treatment because we're in the industry. But the ironic thing is they know that we're in the industry. And I'm like, do you know, between my husband and I, how many Philippine people we know and how damaging this could be if I was an a-hole and decided to tell you where I was and what this meant? Like, but we are literally, and P.S., over the weekend, they were supposed to have done some things. It's now Monday, 2 p.m. Do you know we still haven't heard from them? We were told by the regional. And by the way, the only reason the regional is involved is because we have access to data to find out who these people are. And that regional still has not reached out. And we are literally at our wits' end. But at the same time, and let me tell you one thing that it has caused. You guys know I'm not a shy person. But one of the things I was looking forward to with this community is they do a lot of events. They do a breakfast. They do like the paint and sips. They do all these things. And I was like, I don't even want to go there and show my face because I'm so angry. So now I'm missing out as a resident on experiences that allured me to this community in the first place. And now we have just distanced ourselves and have not built a relationship with this on-site team because we're so mad. We're so mad because it's still unresolved, and this all started in early July, and look at where we are today, and it's still not fixed.
So I didn't mean to Shanghai it and take it away from that, but
No,
I
but
would,
I wrote down your question and
I think it would be
whole thing. It's good.
interesting to see the cultural steps in order to do that. And
Yeah.
yeah, call me later if I can help or whatever
I
I can do,
appreciate it.
and throw some ice your direction, maybe. I don't know. So, but I do have to go. But good call, and I look forward to more in the
Thank
future
you.
because yes, thoughts on training, thoughts on maintenance, thoughts on development and tools and all of those pieces and parts in there.
Yeah,
So
absolutely. Good to see you.
good job. Great to see you.
Good
Great
call.
job. Good
Thank
call.
you.
Great call.
Any
Ian
other
and
final thoughts
Thomas are
before I
wonderful.
hang up?
No, the other thing from a marketing standpoint and a leasing standpoint is what happens with not only just centralization, but when you put in AI technology. I mean, especially because those decisions are made at much higher levels than they are like the impact that happens on the day-to-day staffing, is that they automatically think, oh my God, my job's in jeopardy. They're not looking at it from a whole that this is really going to help them in the long run. They, unfortunately, they get very defensive before, so they don't necessarily always buy into it. So it's a struggle. I mean, so it all comes down to, for me and from my standpoint, is how it's being sold and the involvement and us being able to say to the person that's making the decision, you have to have the buy-in of the site team. So let's get them involved from the get-go.
So true. So true. I agree. I've taken pages of notes today because there are topics that we had that we could just go deeper into. And I look forward to continuing this conversation. Adrian, since you're my only panelist left, thanks again for your thoughts.
Thank you all for for joining. It was a great call, I believe. I think we're like super early in the game still to make judgment calls because there's not enough data points. And without not enough data points, it's just tough. It's a guessing game, right? So we want to replace the guessing with like knowing, and that's gonna be data, and it has to be like quite a bit of data. And also, again, it's not gonna be a one size fits all. The smaller communities, they should have done this like years ago. Like this shouldn't even be like a topic of conversation. I can't think of another way of running smaller communities other than from a central location. But then for largest ones, again, I think the focus is really on how do we increase efficiency. And I'll say the first, increase your current model's efficiency, and then you go to the next thing. Don't jump to centralization and think that that's some magic stuff, because if you have issues now with a legacy model, what centralization will do will just amplify those things. And I hate to hear what you're going through, Tara, but I won't be surprised if you're somehow collateral damage to initiatives of those nature without actually knowing. I'm just speculating, but it won't surprise me if that's the case out there. And like Paul said, his daughter, I think that customer service really suffers, and then start addressing the legacy model, and then go for it. But without by jumping, that's not gonna solve the problem. It's just make them worse.
Yeah, 100%. Well, I look forward. I don't have a date for the next call. I wanted to kind of see how this went. It looks like we have so much more to talk about. We didn't even get to half the questions, which just tells you how much of an impact centralization has on the industry. And then, like I said in the beginning, my husband was like, what about the suppliers? And I was like, damn, I didn't even think about the suppliers.
It's a long way. We're a long way.
It's a long way for sure. Ali, I just got your text. Thank you. I will look into it. I appreciate it. Good to see you guys. And I will keep you posted, obviously, on the next call.
Thank you, Tara. Great call.
Thank you.
Thank you, Joel.
Appreciate y'all.
Bye.
Bye.